Hello everyone. After I posted my last tutorial about cutting techniques, several people asked about how to plan and assemble shadowbox pieces to create a 3D effect. This is what I'm going to be talking about today. You'll have to excuse my heavy accent. This is the first voiceover tutorial I'm putting together, and I'm not normally speaking in English. Hopefully, you'll be able to understand the information I'm trying to convey here. This is the next shadowbox I'm planning, the gravity suit from Metroid Dread. I recently finished the game and absolutely loved it, so thought it would be fun to have this great looking armor in 3D. As you can see, I have the source image ready to go here. You need a scan or a photo of the artwork you want to make in 3D. We are going to make a cutting plan to help us know ahead of time how many copies of the artwork we need. With printed artwork, we can definitely print more if we need to during the shadowbox process, but for a TCG card like Yu-Gi-Oh, we need to know how many to order. This is basically like plotting laser cutter paths, only we don't need to be very exact. Visual planning also helps with cutting, as we don't need to remember from memory the pieces that we later need to assemble. Now I'm just going to drag this over in Photoshop, multiply it several times. Uh, Usually 8 layers is enough for me. Then we need to prepare a top layer where we'll circle the pieces we need to cut. This layer should be using a very contrasting color so it's easy to see. I selected my brush here and I'm just doing a stroke, test stroke. And I'm going to be selecting, let's go with yellow maybe. Yeah, I think that works. And also adding an outside stroke so it's even more visible. I think a very black one should work here. Before proceeding, it's good to know that there are two main ways of making shadow boxes. The topologic method, where each layer has smaller and smaller details and the elements farthest in the background are repeated on each layer. And the sculpting method, my own personal style, where most elements are only cut out once and not repeated. The planning is going to reflect that. It's always a good idea to have a base layer that serves as support for all the pieces. This makes it easier to have a solid shadow box without weak points that only rely on glue to stay together. This layer doesn't necessarily have to be visible, but I like to include the farthest details on it for convenience. Then I start to disassemble the artwork into various elements by imagining how the artwork would look like in 3D and how the pieces would be placed. I try to go for the biggest pieces first and single out as many elements from a single copy as I can. Of course, pieces have to avoid overlapping. As you can see, I'm focusing on several areas of the artwork and finishing those fully before going forward and singling out other elements. Always keep in mind the thickness of the cardboard or print paper. Some elements may be separate in the artwork, but would introduce too much thickness if cut separately. For example, these spokes here are a bit too close. They may be overlapping in the original artwork, but because of the distance in the background, they're a bit too close to each other. So I'm not going to cut out those separately. I'm going to cut these out separately because it would be too much thickness. So I let them stay connected and I'm going to engrave or etch those lines instead to create the illusion of overlapping. Okay, so I think we're done with the arm in the background and we can proceed with other elements. It's a bit tricky here that the purple area looks like it's part of the body, like closer to the body, but here it's overlapping the other armor elements. So I think I'm gonna cut out a layer here that's going to be under both of these elements that I'm going to cut out later. And I'm going to connect the arm to that area, most likely. Okay, so the arms are both done now, and we can proceed to circle out the torso, I think. And now let's cut out the purple part. For this, you have to keep in mind that you don't necessarily need to cut out every single element individually. So, because you're doing an illusion of 3D, you can place some elements on the same layer if that makes sense structurally. So, for example, I can cut out the neck here and this bit of torso that's visible, but connect it to the purple part. Even if those were originally separate elements, that won't be the fact that these are together won't be visible in the final product, and it helps with making the shadow box more solid and more robust. Now we can reuse some of these layers to cut out these armor pieces. And here, as you can see, technically they're different elements, but the thickness is so low that I might not be able to separate these lines and instead engrave them. But what I'm going to do, because the purple part again is covering these silver areas, I'll just cut it like this, and then come with the other part on top and instead switch these up. The back of the collar is included in this part. That's also a structural element. Okay, now let's go for the head. Again, the part about including separate elements on the same layer. The green area here can be included in the same layer as the chin of the helmet. And that won't be visible in the final result. And finally, we need to take out all the elements for the legs. Normally, you could consider this area like bottom layer, middle layer, and top layer. But that creates a bit of a problem because then you have to to cut the leg separately. In this case, because it's pretty close to only considering like bottom layer and then top layer, I'm going to go for that option because it lets me keep the legs together on a single layer and is more structurally resistant. But This is a personal style call, and you can go either way. I see I've made a mistake here. This part also has that white line there that we need to cut out. So I'm going to try to take it maybe from another place. We can join these because initially I thought it's better to have them as two element, but didn't realize that basically they're on the same level. So I'm gonna join those there. And now I'm just going to double check everything to make sure that I picked out all the elements that I want to have in my shadow box. And there you have it. That's basically how you plan out the pieces that you're going to cut and then assemble. This is my own personal method. Obviously, this can be done in a lot of other different ways.